Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Jobs and the economy, that's something we all think about, right?
Yeah, it's always on our minds these days.
But today, we're going local. We're diving deep into the OECD's Job Creation and Local Economic Development Report. Fresh off the press, November 28th.
Oh, nice.
And honestly, I gotta say, when I saw this report, I was like, ugh, another economic report. This is gonna be boring. But then I started reading it.
Really?
And let me tell you, this thing is packed with insights about where the job market is headed, especially with all the AI stuff happening.
Hmm.
So to help us make sense of it all, and more importantly, to figure out what it means for you, no matter where you live,
Mm.
I brought in our expert. This is the person who, lives and breathes this kind of data.
Well, that's the goal, right? To connect those big global trends to what's happening in your own backyard. Because honestly, this report isn't just for economists, it's for anyone who wants to understand what the future of work might look like in their own communities.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The report kicks off by giving us a snapshot of how regional economies are doing. And one thing that really jumped out at me was this. The recovery from COVID, it's not been a smooth ride for everyone.
It's so true. You hear all this talk about how the national economy is bouncing back, right?
Right.
But a lot of regions are actually, they're still lagging behind. The report says less than half of all the regions in developed countries have fully recovered the jobs that were lost during the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
So even if the overall picture seems okay, your local area might still be feeling the aftershocks.
That makes so much sense. I have a cousin, lives in a small town up north,
Yeah.
and their factory, the main employer in town, it shut down during COVID, and guess what? Never reopened.
Oh,
So
no.
it's like this uneven recovery is playing out in real people's lives right in front of us.
Absolutely. And it gets even more interesting when you start to look at things on a smaller scale. The report found this huge gap between
Like what
regions.
kind of gap?
A 10 percentage point difference between the regions with the highest and lowest employment rates. Think about that. That's enormous.
That's huge GE.
It's like saying your chances of landing a job could literally depend on your zip code.
That's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's causing such a big difference between regions? Is it just about what kind of industries are there?
Well, that's part of it for sure. Some regions are just in a better position for growth, right?
Right.
But then there's this other thing, the report calls it the productivity puzzle.
Okay. Productivity puzzle sounds kind of complicated. Can you break it down for us?
Sure. Think of productivity as how efficiently we turn work into actual stuff, things we can buy, use.
Right.
When productivity is growing, it means our standard of living is going up too. We're getting more bang for our buck.
Gotcha.
But here's the thing. In the past decade or so, productivity growth has been pretty sluggish, especially compared to earlier periods. It's like we're working harder, but not seeing the same gains.
Yeah.
You feel that? And this isn't just a national problem. It's playing out differently in different regions.
So some areas are getting more productive while others are kind of stuck.
Mm.
What does that even mean for, normal people?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The report found that in some countries, the most productive regions are a whopping 50% more productive than the least productive ones.
Whoa.
That means if you're living in one of those lagging regions, you're essentially missing out on potential income growth. You could be missing out on a higher standard of living, even if you're working just as hard as someone in a more productive area.
That's crazy. So it's like your location really matters when it comes to your economic well-being.
It really does.
But what can you do about it? Can you just pick up and move to a more productive region?
Well, it's not always that easy, right?
Not really.
But the report does point to a few things that can help, like investing in education and training, so people have the skills needed for those high productivity jobs. And it's not just about individual skills, it's about the whole environment of a region. Things like infrastructure, access to money, and even just a culture that's pro-innovation.
So it's about creating the right conditions for businesses, indie workers to thrive, no matter where they happen to be.
Exactly. It's about making sure everyone has a shot at a good job and a good life.
I like that. A good life, regardless of your zip code.
Right. But there's this other major trend that's shaking things up that we need to talk about, labor shortages. You've probably heard about this on the news.
Oh, yeah, everyone's talking about it. I even saw a sign at my local coffee shop the other day that said, hiring, desperately. It's like businesses are desperate for workers. But how bad is it, really?
The report says, honestly, it's worse than it looks. In a lot of countries, there are more job openings than people looking for work. Way more.
Wow.
It's what economists call labor market tightness, and it's definitely been getting worse.
Labor market tightness. Okay,
Oh,
so that basically means there are more jobs than workers to fill them.
you got it.
Like musical chairs, but with fewer chairs than people.
Exactly. And just to give you an idea of how much this has ramped up, in Germany, the labor market has tightened by 50% compared to before COVID hit.
Yeah.
And in the US, it's like a crazy 80%.
80%.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So is this happening like everywhere? Or are there certain types of jobs, certain places where it's worse?
Well, the report dug into that, and they found that there are these shortage hotspots, specific sectors like anything tech-related and green jobs are booming right now.
Right, right. Makes sense.
And guess what? It's often the more populous urban areas that are feeling the crunch the most. Places that specialize in those, service-y kind of jobs.
So if you're in like a big city and you're looking for a tech job or something in sustainability, you're probably in a good spot.
Yeah, you might have more options, that's for sure. But here's the thing. The report also points out that rural areas are feeling the pinch, too.
Yeah.
Often they lack the same kind of job opportunities as the big cities, and it's tougher to attract workers, keep them in those areas.
It's like a double whammy for rural communities, right? They're still recovering from the pandemic. A&D dealing with this labor shortage on top of it.
Mhm.
This feels like it's hitting close to home for a lot of our listeners.
It does.
I mean, a lot of people are dealing with this.
And it brings up an important question, right? What happens to wages when there aren't enough workers to go around?
Yeah. If businesses are desperate for workers, you'd think they'd have to pay more to, like, attract them.
Right.
Just basic supply and demand.
You would think that, but it's not quite that simple. The report says that, yeah, in theory, labor shortages should push wages up. But right now, inflation is eating away at people's paychecks.
Inflation. The
Yeah.
worst.
So real wages have actually gone down recently. The good news is, as inflation cools down, those labor shortages could start to translate into, higher wages
Yeah.
eventually.
So there's hope on the horizon. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
But speaking of things that are changing the job landscape, we have VE to talk about AI.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like everyone's talking about ChatGPT and all that, but this OECD report really gets into the nitty-gritty of how AI, especially this generative AI stuff, is going to impact jobs. And in a really concrete way.
It's not just hype. This is a real game changer.
Yeah.
And the report isn't shying away from like the potential disruptions, right? But it also highlights these amazing opportunities that AI could bring, which is really exciting.
Okay, so before we get too deep into those opportunities, can we just back up for a sec? For anyone listening who might not be like super tech savvy, what is generative AI and why is it different from that, robots taking over our jobs kind of AI that we've been hearing about for years?
Good question. It's important to get that straight. So basically, generative AI, it's this super smart technology that can create things. It's like having a computer that can write poems, compose music, even design websites all by itself. It learns from massive amounts of data and then uses that knowledge to like generate new stuff, totally new stuff.
So it's not just about robots replacing factory workers anymore. This generative AI could affect like a much wider range of jobs, right?
Yeah.
It's even creative ones that we thought were like safe from automation.
That's exactly what the report is saying. And get this, they've come up with these new estimates for how exposed different jobs, different regions are to this whole AI revolution. And let me tell you, the range is huge, EE.
Okay, spill the beans. What kind of numbers are we talking?
Hold on tight because this is where it gets wild. Depending on where you live and your job, of course, anywhere from 16% to a whopping 77% of the workforce could be affected by AI.
Whoa. That's a massive difference.
Yeah.
So like what determines whether your job is more or less likely to be impacted? Is it just about like what kind of work you do?
Well, that's part of it. Some jobs are just easier to automate, right?
Right.
But the report found this really strong connection between AI exposure and population density.
Wait, so you're telling me that where you live could actually determine how likely your job is to change because of AI?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but that's what the data suggests. The more densely populated a region is, the higher the potential exposure to AI.
So city dwellers are on the front lines of the AI revolution.
It's looking that way.
Makes sense. Cities tend to be more tech-driven anyway. But what about people who live in smaller towns or rural areas? Are they going to be left behind?
That's the worry, right? And it all points to a potential digital divide. Rural areas often lack the same level of tech infrastructure, same level of investment, and even access to those kinds of education and training programs that would get people ready for, AI-related jobs.
Like a whole new set of challenges on top of the ones they're already facing.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But we've talked a lot about, the potential downsides of AI. What about the good stuff? Like, is there any upside to all of this?
Oh, absolutely. And the report really emphasizes this. It's not all doom and gloom. In fact, AI has the potential to be a powerful force for good.
Okay.
It could boost productivity, make us all richer, and even help us solve some of the world's biggest problems.
All right, I'm intrigued. Give us some examples. How could AI actually make our lives better?
Okay, imagine AI helping doctors diagnose diseases faster, more
Huh.
accurately, leading to earlier treatment and better outcomes for patients. Or think about self-driving cars. We've been hearing about them forever.
Yeah, forever.
AI could make transportation safer, more efficient.
Yeah,
And here's something that's really close to my heart. AI could help us fight climate change
really.
by optimizing energy grids, designing buildings that are more sustainable, and even coming up with new ways to capture carbon from the atmosphere. I mean, the possibilities are endless.
Wow, so AI isn't just about, like, robots taking jobs. It's about solving real-world problems, creating a better future for everyone.
Exactly. But here's the thing that really surprised me. The report found that those earlier fears about automation leading to massive job losses, they might have been overblown.
Really?
Yeah. They looked at the impact of like past automation waves, when new technologies came in and found there was no clear link to overall job losses.
Interesting.
What happened was when jobs were lost in one sector, new ones were often created in other sectors.
So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game, like robots take over and humans are left with nothing to do.
It's way more complex than that. And the report actually suggests that AI could lead to the creation of whole new industries and job categories that we haven't even imagined yet.
That's kind of exciting.
It is.
So instead of fearing AI, maybe we should be focusing on, how to adapt and prepare for this new world of work.
That's exactly it. And that's where the report gets super practical, offering all sorts of policy recommendations for how we can make sure everyone benefits from this AI revolution. But I think we'll save that juicy stuff for the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, cliffhanger. All right, everyone, stick around. We'll be right back to delve into those policy recommendations and explore some inspiring real-world examples of communities that are already adapting and thriving in this new era of work.
Can't wait. Welcome back. We've been talking about AI and jobs and, where you live can really matter. This OECD report really digs into that, how different communities are experiencing these big shifts in the job market.
Yeah, that was one of the things that stood out to me, too. So what kind of communities are we talking about here?
Well, one of the biggest divides that the report highlights is the difference between urban and rural areas. And it ties back to, what we were saying about AI.
Yeah, I remember. The more people packed into an area, the more likely they are to be affected by AI. Which kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
SIDS have all those tech companies.
Exactly. Big cities often have those like cutting edge industries that are already using AI, finance, healthcare, tech, those fields that are always innovating. Rural areas, often they just don't have the same access to, the digital infrastructure, the investment, even the right training programs.
So it's not just about, like, a skills gap between workers. There's also a technology gap, an investment gap between regions.
You got it. And the report really emphasizes that. This digital divide, it could make things even tougher for rural areas, especially as AI becomes more and more common, could lead to more inequality, fewer opportunities for those communities.
Yeah, makes you think, right? It's almost like a vicious cycle. If rural areas are less exposed to AI, they might not develop the skills, they might not attract the investments needed to keep up, which in turn widens the gap even more.
Exactly, that's the risk. But the report does suggest some ways to break that cycle.
Okay, like what?
Things like investing in broadband internet for everyone, supporting digital skills training in those rural areas, and finding ways to use AI in sectors that are already big in rural communities, like agriculture.
Oh, interesting.
Imagine AI helping farmers, with crop yields or livestock management. That could be huge.
That's so cool. It's like use technology to bridge the gap instead of letting it make things worse.
Yeah.
But it's not just about urban versus rural, is it? The report also looks at how different age groups are experiencing these changes in the job market.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the big challenges, for a lot of developed countries, a lot of them are facing this, is an aging workforce. People are living longer, which is great, but birth rates are declining in lots of places, means fewer young people entering the workforce.
Yeah, that's that whole shrinking working age population
Ah,
thing, right? I remember reading about that. It's supposed to shrink by almost 16% in the oldest 20% of regions, like over the next 20 years.
that's a massive shift. And it's something countries are really trying to figure out because if there aren't enough people to fill jobs, it can really slow down the whole economy.
So what can be done about it? Is everyone just going to have to work longer?
Mm.
I mean, I love my job, but I'm not sure I want to be working till I'm 80.
Huh. I hear you. Well, the report suggests some other things, like encouraging lifelong learning. Instead of retiring at 65, what if people kept learning new skills, stayed engaged in the workforce longer, maybe in different roles, with more flexibility?
So it's about keeping people productive and contributing, but on their own terms. I like that.
Right. And another strategy is attracting skilled workers from other countries through immigration.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This can help fill those gaps in the labor market, especially in those shortage hotspots we were talking about before.
Right, where they need people the most. But what about automation? Could that help address the labor shortage too?
That's actually one of the things the report explores. It might sound a little counterintuitive, but using automation could actually help fill some of those gaps.
Wait, so you're saying robots could solve the labor shortage? I thought robots could take our jobs.
It's not about replacing humans completely. It's more about, helping us do things better. Think about it. Robots could take over dangerous tasks, repetitive tasks, physically demanding things. And that could free up human workers to focus on, well, things that require creativity, problem solving, all those uniquely human skills that robots just can't do.
So it's like working smarter, not harder. I'm starting to see the potential here. And maybe in some cases, using automation could even create new jobs, right? Like someone's got to design and build those robots.
Exactly. That's a great point. The report talks about how we need to think about automation in a more, well, nuanced way. It's not just about job losses. It's also about creating new opportunities,
Yeah.
making work more, fulfilling for everyone.
I like where this is going. Instead of being afraid of robots, we should be thinking about how to work alongside them, use technology to make things better.
Exactly. It's about embracing the possibilities, making sure everyone benefits from all these advances. But there's another piece of the puzzle that the report digs into that we need to talk about: gender inequality in the workforce.
Ooh, yeah, that's a big one. I feel like we've made some progress. But women are still facing, a lot of challenges in the workplace.
It's true. And the report confirms that. It found that women are still underrepresented in a lot of high growth fields, especially in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math,
Right. And they often face those barriers related to work-life balance, access to things like affordable childcare.
which can make it really hard to participate fully in the workforce?
Yes, it's like society expects women to do it all of a career, raise kids, manage everything else. It's a lot to juggle.
It is. And for women in certain situations, like single mothers or women in rural areas where there aren't as many resources, those challenges can be even greater.
So it's like a whole extra layer of complexity on top of everything else. Yeah. So what does the report suggest we do about it?
Well, it calls for policies that, try to address those systemic barriers, create a more level playing field for everyone. Things like promoting gender equality in education and training programs, expanding access to affordable childcare, and encouraging more flexible work arrangements so women can, balance work and family.
All good ideas. But let's be real, these are pretty big, complex problems.
Yeah.
Are there any countries out there that are actually getting this right, doing things differently? I'd love to hear some success stories.
There are, and that's one of the things that's so inspiring about this report, honestly. It's not just about, identifying problems, it's about showcasing solutions, giving us hope that things can actually change.
Okay, I'm all ears. Hit me with some of those inspiring examples.
Well, one that I thought was really interesting was Japan's regional revitalization strategy. They're dealing with some major demographic challenges, aging population, declining birth rates, but they're really tackling it head on with this innovative approach.
I'm curious. It sounds like they're facing those same problems that a lot of developed countries are dealing with.
They are, and they've realized that it's not enough to just create jobs. You have to create communities that people actually want to live in. So they've launched these programs to attract young people, families to rural areas, offering financial incentives to relocate, providing support for starting businesses, investing in things that improve quality of life.
So it's not just about the job, it's about like the whole package, the whole ecosystem that supports people, makes them feel like they can thrive.
That's it. That's what I love about this approach. It's holistic, recognizes that economic development, social well-being, community, they're all connected. You can't have one without the others.
That's such a great example. Are there any other countries doing cool things that you think our listeners would want to hear about?
Oh yeah, tons. Another one that stood out to me was Canada's rural and northern immigration pilot. They're trying to address labor shortages in their rural communities by making it easier for skilled immigrants to settle in those areas.
Interesting. So they're not just focusing on urban centers for immigration, they're thinking about the needs of their rural communities too.
Exactly. And they're not just bringing people in to fill jobs, they're actively trying to help them integrate into the community. Offering support with job searching, language training, even just getting settled into a new place.
So it's about creating a welcoming and inclusive environment, not just filling job slots.
Exactly. And it's another example of how immigration can be a win-win. It can help address labor shortages, bring new skills and perspectives to communities, and at the same time, it gives immigrants the chance to build a new life.
Love it. All right, we've covered a lot of ground here. The digital divide, aging workforce, gender inequality, and some pretty cool solutions that are happening around the world. But I think it's time to zoom out for a minute, talk about the big picture, the future of work itself. What does all this mean for how we think about work in the years to come?
That's the big question, isn't it? And none of us has a crystal ball. But this report gives us some clues, for sure. One thing that's clear is that old way of thinking about work. It's changing. Fast.
Okay, so what's changing? What does the new world of work look like?
Well, the gig economy is exploding.
Yeah.
More and more people are working freelance, on contract, or in those, short-term gigs. And with remote work becoming so common, people aren't tied to a specific location anymore. Opens up a lot of possibilities, but also creates new challenges.
So it's like work is becoming more fluid, less tied to a traditional 9-to-5 office-based job.
Exactly. And that means workers need to be adaptable, self-motivated, comfortable with uncertainty. You got to be able to roll with the punches, be willing to constantly learn new skills. Because the job market's changing so quickly.
It's like you almost have to become a lifelong learner just to keep up.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's not just about technical skills anymore. The report talks about the growing importance of soft skills like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving.
Right.
Those are the skills that, machines can't replicate, at least not yet.
Those are the human skills, right?
Exactly. The things that make us, uniquely human, allow us to connect, to solve problems in creative ways. And the report says those are the skills that will help us not just survive, but thrive in a world where AI is becoming more prevalent. It's not about competing with machines. It's about finding ways to collaborate with them, use their strengths to, make ourselves better.
Love that perspective. It's not about being afraid of the future. It's about, figuring out how to make technology work for us, not against us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what I find so exciting about this report. It's not just about, pointing out the problems. It's about empowering us to take control of our future.
Okay, I'm feeling pumped up. But before we get too carried away, I want to hear more about those real-world examples you mentioned. How actual communities are putting these ideas into practice, creating a better future for themselves.
Let's do it. Let's take a closer look at those inspiring case studies and, see what takeaways our listeners can use in their own lives and communities.
Sounds good to me. Everyone stay tuned. We're going to dive into those real-world examples of how communities are creating a better future of work.
It's going to be inspiring.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been digging into this awesome report from the OECD all about jobs and local economies. And you know what? It's not all doom and gloom.
Not even close. We were just about to get into some real-world examples, Communities that are facing these challenges head-on, coming up with some super creative solutions.
Inspiring stuff. So hit me with your first example. Where are we going?
Let's travel to Japan, to a small rural town called Kamikatsu. Now, this town, they were facing some of those same challenges we talked about before. Declining population, aging workforce, shrinking economy. Sound familiar?
Yeah, that's like the story of so many towns, not just in Japan, but all over, right?
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of just, giving in to those challenges, Kamikatsu decided to, turn things around. They looked at what they had, what they were good at, and they came up with a plan that's, well, pretty clever.
Okay, I'm hooked. What'd they do?
They realized that even though their traditional agriculture industry was struggling, they had this other amazing resource, sumomono.
Simple one, no.
Sumomono, it's this special type of leaf used in Japanese cuisine, and it grows really well in their region.
Oh, like a local specialty kind of thing.
Exactly. And they had all these, experienced farmers, a lot of them over 70, who knew everything about growing and harvesting this sumono leaf. It was like this hidden treasure just waiting to be, rediscovered.
Okay, so they had the resource, they had the expertise. What did they do with it?
They got organized, formed this public-private partnership called the Iridori Corporation, which brought together those local farmers, the town government, and they started selling this sumomono to restaurants, markets, creating this whole new source of income for the town, and gave those older residents, good jobs.
Love that. It's like they took something that was already there,
Yeah.
that traditional knowledge, and turned it into this thriving new industry. Brilliant.
It is. And the coolest part, it's not just about the money. This Iridori Corporation, it's had this huge impact on the whole community. They actually have some of the lowest healthcare costs in the whole prefecture, even though they have a lot of older people. It's a real win-win, where economic opportunity leads to better health, a stronger sense of community.
That's fantastic. Really shows that sometimes the solutions are right there in front of us. We just have to, look for them. Be
Yeah.
willing to think outside the box.
Totally. And this is a model that other communities could follow, right? Whether they're dealing with, people moving away, economic troubles, or just, wanting a better future, more sustainable future.
Okay, so Japan is showing us how to use what you've got, empower those experienced workers. What other inspiring examples did you find in the report?
All right, let's hop over to Ireland, to a region called Donegal. They had a different challenge. Women were having a hard time, getting into or back into the workforce after taking time off for family or caregiving.
Yeah, that's a common problem,
Hmm?
especially for women. Tough to, get back in the game after a break, especially if your skills are, a little rusty.
Exactly. And that's where this thing called the WISE Project came in. Stands for Women's Integration Skills and Employment. It's this program that provides personalized support for women trying to get back into the workforce.
Personalized support. Okay, I'm interested. What does that look like?
Well, it's not just job listings or generic training. WISE goes way beyond that. They help with the basics, writing a good CV, doing well in job interviews, understanding those employment contracts. And they also, help women build their confidence, develop a support network.
So it's like giving women the tools and the confidence they need to succeed.
Yeah.
Love that. What were the results? Did it work?
The results were amazing. Over 70% of the women who went through the WISE program found jobs and kept them long term.
70%. That's incredible. It shows those targeted programs, the ones that really address specific needs, can make a real difference.
Big time. It highlights the importance of investing in those programs that help people, overcome those barriers to employment. Whether it's women, young people, immigrants, whoever's facing those challenges, it's all about making the workforce more inclusive, more fair, so everyone has a chance.
That's what it's all about. Okay, give me one more example, one more inspiring story to send us off on a positive note.
All right, let's head back to Canada. Remember how we talked about them trying out those cool immigration policies to deal with labor shortages, especially in rural areas?
Yeah, like trying to attract skilled workers to those communities that are having trouble finding people. What was it called again?
The Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot. It's pretty cool. Basically, it makes it easier for skilled immigrants to get permanent residency in Canada if they're willing to settle in one of these, participating rural communities, the ones that need workers.
So it's like a matchmaking service,
Mhm.
matching skilled workers with communities that need them. I like it.
Right. And it's not just about filling those empty jobs. The program helps immigrants settle in,
Yeah.
finding housing, learning the language, even just connecting with other people in the community.
So it's about being welcoming, supportive, making sure people feel like they belong.
Exactly. Recognizing that, successful immigration, it's about way more than just economics. It's about building strong communities.
Wow, these examples are so inspiring. Like a breath of fresh air, makes you feel hopeful, Like we can create a better future of work for everyone.
I agree. And honestly, that's the message I want people to take away from all of this. The future of work, it's not something to be afraid of. It's something we can shape by understanding those big trends, embracing lifelong learning, and demanding that our leaders actually invest in people, in communities. We can build a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This report from the OECD, it's definitely worth a read for anyone who wants to understand, where the job market's headed
Mm.
and what we can do to create a future of work that's more fair, more sustainable. We'll include a link to it in the show notes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
And to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions. Until next time, stay curious.